All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CM11 Pisces Cup Guide. I'm sorry this guide is a little bit later than my usual just because of Trackblazer and Kitasan Black release. I had to take a couple extra days to do some more testing and make sure that all the information that I present is accurate to my own experiences. So the Pisces Cup is going to take place on a 3,200-meter track, which is a very long course for most UMAs. It is a standard distance track, and the conditions will be heavy, so wet conditions, rainy days, very dreary weather, honestly. It takes place during spring, and it's going to be at the Hanshin Race Course. So these are all of the greens that you would need to look for if you're looking to get some track-specific greens. With the Pisces Cup comes a bit of a challenge for the player base. So the new Trackblazer scenario has just dropped, and so everybody's still kind of getting used to that, learning it, figuring out, how it works, figuring out how to get the most out of it. Additionally, this Pisces Cup has a huge stamina requirement because it's an extremely long course with terrible weather conditions. And to top that all off, there is a very poor, reliable accel availability in this course. There's not a whole lot of accelerations that will work, and even the accelerations that will work are going to be weaker than usual, which means that your UMAs are just going to be chugging along for this entire 3,200 course, and you're just going to be doing the best that you can to make sure that they're in first place, right? So my advice for this would just be to take it a little bit easy, use this as an opportunity to learn Trackblazer, to learn how to build effectively with these target stats in mind. And that's going to help you moving forward as we're continuing through this scenario and doing other CMs. So this is the Pisces Cup race course, and there's a couple of interesting things that I want to point out about this. The first thing is that, as usual, you want to be accelerating right here. This is where the mid leg turns into the final leg. This is the final spurt. So we want to try to time our acceleration skills here. Now, the interesting thing about this course is that the final leg here starts on a straight, but it doesn't start on the final straight. So skills that will proc on the final straight, such as El Condor Pasa's Victoria por Plancha or Give Mummy a Hug, those are all going to proc here, which means they proc way too late, right? So we need to proc skills on a late race straight. And so this is pretty much just straightaway spurt. Now, angling and scheming will proc here from corner 3, from the very, very beginning of corner 3, but this is actually almost 100 meters after where the late race starts, which means that if you hit angling and scheming here, you're not going to get very much acceleration because you've already been accelerating for almost 100 meters. And so a lot of for example, the end closers who hit straightaway spurt are going to be catching up to you. So here I have your keywords are going to be late race straight, and your anti-keywords, which are going to be things that don't actually work for accel skills, is going to be things like final corner, late race corner, final straight, anything like that is not going to work on this track unless it's a velocity skill, right? If we're looking for acceleration skills, it's pretty much just the late race straight. Some other interesting things to note about this track is that it does have 2 significant downhills. One of them is before the final leg, which means that depending on your wit, you might be able to conserve stamina by hitting your wit checks on this downhill. There's a couple uphills here, but these are not well timed for Highlander procs. This second downhill here is significantly after the final leg starts, so skills like straight descent, which will give you some acceleration on a downhill, is not going to be good here either. So I would not recommend taking either straight descent or Highlander for this track. So let's talk about reliable inheritable accels. These are going to be accels that hit at the same spot on the course in every single race. There's only 2. The first is going to be Victory Cheer from Kitasan Black, who did just release. Victory Cheer hits from first or second position. When it's inherited, it's only a 0.1. It's a little bit weak when it's inherited, but it's honestly better than nothing. Victory Cheer, it is a little bit tricky to interpret here, but this condition, the straight front type equals 2, means that it's going to be the straight that is away from the audience. So basically the straight that's before corner 3, which is exactly this straight. Kitasan Black was basically designed for this course. So just keep in mind that her unique is also going to hit right here, right exactly where we want it to. So this is going to be an acceleration skill that all front runners will have access to because it hits from first and second place. So the other skill that hits right at that time is going to be straightaway spurt and encroaching shadow. Encroaching shadow is the gold version. Encroaching Shadow so far is only on Narita Taishin Uma. It's not on any cards. There's no other way to get it. But you can inherit Straightaway Spurt onto any other end closer and do just fine. This is an end closer only skill, which means that only end closers and fronts are going to really have access to reliable accelerations in this CM. So really, when you get right down to it, this means that CM11, the Pisces Cup, is going to be mainly fronts versus ends, because those are the only two roles that are going to have reliable acceleration. The main job of the front runners is to stretch out the lobby so far that end closers won't be able to catch up even with a slightly better acceleration package. Because the race course is so long, fronts have a much longer time to stretch out that lobby and to get as far ahead as humanly possible so that just nobody can catch up to them. To combat this a little bit, end closers can take No Stopping Me. Unfortunately, they do have to use the Yukino Bijin Wit card to get it now, but it is still a very strong acceleration, and we don't have a lot of options for acceleration. So end closers will be able to still close that gap with a very strong mid-race, well-timed No Stopping Me, and that Straightaway Spurt or Encroaching Shadow. Now, the flip side to this is that there's usually a lot more fronts in room matches than there are in the actual CM. So in the actual CM, I'm predicting that there might not be as many fronts, and if there are no fronts in your lobby, then the end closer that hits No Stopping Me is probably going to win the match. So what does this mean for pace and late? So pace and late don't really have any reliable accels outside of clever team building and perhaps UMA-specific accelerations, which puts them in a really awkward position. It's a super long course, so they can actually just try to outbuild fronts and ends, kind of using the same strategy that fronts are using to try to stretch out the lobby a lot. They can also try to inherit like a lot of velocity skills. They can try to use a really high wit, a lot of mid-race, and hope to get lucky. But basically, pace and late are not going to be very strong because they just don't have access to those accelerations, and they also don't have access to the ability to stretch out the lobby as much as a front would. So, for example, paces can try for a lucky pace angle. If there are no fronts in the lobby, they can inherit victory cheer. They can, inherit some skills that helps them be forward, but they won't be able to stretch out that lobby so much that end closers won't be able to catch up to them. You also definitely should not be relying on your left on late surgers, because end closers are going to take all of the late surger slots in most of your lobbies, honestly. Even if you're not running any end closers yourself, I don't think that lates will be able to have access to on your left just because of how strong end closers are relative to other positions in this course. Like I mentioned earlier, victory cheer is going to proc about 100 meters before angling and scheming. So even though angling and scheming technically has a stronger acceleration, it's going to proc very late into the accel phase relative to when you're actually accelerating. So therefore, it will not be as effective. I do have angling and scheming on my current frontrunner ace, and I do think that it helps a tiny bit, but it's not generally going to be worth the SP over getting some velocity skills unless you literally have nothing else to buy, which was the case for me. Victory cheer again works from first or second, so you can actually use a runaway and not totally worry about her stealing your acceleration slot. And then you want to look for a late race velocity. Because acceleration is so thin on the ground right now, and because the race goes on for so much longer after the final leg starts, getting a late race velocity skill is actually going to help quite a bit. So whether that is New Year Tia Opera O, whether that's Mejioma Queen, whether that's original Oguri Cap, just any kind of late race velocity that you can pick up that will reliably hit and keep you as far ahead as possible from the end closers who are, closing on your location, you probably want to look for something like that. As usual, 2 fronts are going to be better than 1. Because this is a front and end only meta, there can be an argument made for only bringing 1 front and assuming that you're going to meet other fronts in the lobby. I don't know if that is really going to shake out in practice, but it is a possibility. So you really want to stack mid-race, you really want to stack wit, you really want to beat these other fronts in the mid-race, especially if there's going to be a runaway in the lobby, because this runaway is going to be possibly taking one of those victory cheer slots, and you want to make sure that your front is taking the other one. So your first priority on this course is literally survive the track, right? And a pace chaser is going to be the easiest role to get you there. So if you are not able to build another position with enough recoveries to survive the track, I would recommend trying to build a pace chaser. Now, pace chasers can just pile on all of the velocity skills they can get. They can try to pile on as many stats as they can get, while taking advantage of their innate golds, perhaps, to do a little bit less stamina, maybe a little bit more power and wit, you know, try to make sure that you are able to survive the track, but maybe use that inherent advantage of having that built-in gold skill a little bit better. This is just an example, but you could do something like a runaway chariot comp, so that runaway Suzuka that you built in Unity Cup, with a victory cheer inherited onto your pace, and then also no stopping me onto your pace. That would be a very strong comp because you can hit victory cheer from second place, run into Suzuka, hit no stopping me, and then win the match. But if there's literally any fronts in this lobby, that strategy is not going to work, and you're pretty much going to be buffing those fronts. So you want to be careful. I don't think this is really the best way to run a pace, but I do think it might be the most winnable a pace can possibly be in this CM. Christmas Oguri is a special exception. I would say that she is strong, but she's not quite dominant on this race course because she can't proc her unique with reliable acceleration or carryover. So her unique is usually just going to be an additional recovery plus a velocity increase, which is still very strong. Like, it'll give her a very, very strong mid-race, but it's not going to be as game-changing as it will be on other courses. However, because she does have this recovery unique, because she needs to get those recovery white skills, her stamina requirement is going to be significantly reduced. Radiant Star, which is the scenario skill from Trackblazer, can also proc her unique because there is a heal inside of Radiant Star. And I'm going to talk a lot about Radiant Star later, so just keep that in mind that Radiant Star can proc Christmas Oguri's unique. I do think that End Christmas Oguri is probably going to be your best bet, especially because she can get straightaway spurt, she has the aptitudes to get to end closing while running longs pretty easily, but she can also run front, she can also be pace, and pace will be the easiest to build for because she does have Gourmand in her kit, and then she could also be run as late. I wouldn't really recommend it, there's not really a great reason to do so. So late surgers are in a bit of a bind this CM. End closers are going to take all of your acceleration slots, but honestly, on your left and Let's Pump Some Iron and so on and so forth are not going to be very good anyway, so I guess that's fine. But as a late surger, you are looking at the same win conditions as a pace chaser. You want to outskill and outstat everybody else in the lobby in order to win. And that's kind of it. They don't really have anything, which is pretty sad. So yeah. End closers. So for all end closers, straightaway spurt is a must. It is the acceleration skill that sets them apart from every other position in the lobby. This makes Narita Taishin very, very strong because she has that encroaching shadow, which is the gold version of straightaway spurt. So encroaching shadow will be a 0.4 acceleration, and Taishin is the only Uma that will get a 0.4 acceleration on this track. If you want to run No Stopping Me on your end closer, which I would definitely recommend, especially if you're running 2 or more, you will have to slot in the Yukino Bijin Wit card. Unfortunately, this is not a very strong card. Because we're in Trackblazer, race bonus matters. It only has 5 race bonus even at MLB. It's just not a very strong card, but it is worth slotting in for No Stopping Me if you can spare the team slots. So if you are able to get your recovery handled, then I would recommend trying to slot in this card. So the purpose of end closers is to stack your mid race and your wit to push up as much as possible in lobbies where fronts are trying to create a gap. You don't want them to create that gap because you want to use straightaway spurt to close that gap. And the easiest time you will have to do so is if you are pushing up as much as possible in the mid race. So skills like Umastand are going to help a lot here. Really any mid race skill. Professor of Curvature is very strong in this chorus because it can proc multiple times. And you know, any of your daring strike, your end corners, end straights, it's on, ramp up, you know, anything like that is going to really help, as well as having a little bit higher wit. So I do want to talk a little bit more about end closers in a vacuum because there's actually some pretty interesting stuff happening right now due to just the way that the rooms are shaping up. So there's a big disclaimer with all of this in that champion meeting room matches are not indicative of the actual lobbies that you'll be seeing always. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be matching the lobbies sometimes, and that doesn't mean that the general meta is not going to be seen in your champion meeting lobbies. However, it does mean that this is going to be a little bit shakier. Take it with a little bit more of a grain of salt because there will be players who are running pace and late, despite those 2 roles not being very strong in this CM. But something that I have noticed is that in room matches where there are, for example, 2 fronts and 7 ends, right? So this is not a totally unlikely room that you see in room matches right now where there's no pace, there's no lates, the 2 fronts are stretching out the lobby as much as they possibly can. So there's actually a ton of distance here. And if this is your end closer, so for example, if your end closer is going to be pushing up with a lot of mid-race, a lot of wit. Maybe your end is the best end in the lobby, right? So your end closer right now is 3rd place. And so when the late race starts, these two fronts right here are going to both hit victory cheer, and they're both going to push up, okay? So when these two fronts both push up, your end closer hits straightaway spurt, and your end closer also tries to push up. But you can't close this huge gap in time, right? So your end closer doesn't have any overtake targets. They don't have any no stopping me targets. They have pretty much nothing, which means that this end closer that has maybe hits your end closer with a no stopping me, or maybe passes your end closer. Maybe this is like a Tama and she hits her unique by passing your end closer, is probably going to win. So the problem is with end closes right now is that we have kind of a tall poppy syndrome. And for those not familiar, what tall poppy syndrome means is usually the one that sticks out of the pack the most is going to get cut. So the one that sticks out of the pack the most is not going to have a great time because they don't have any targets for any of their overtakes. She is not going to be hitting she's not going to be hitting no stopping me. She's not going to be hitting any overtake uniques, which means that she's not going to be hitting, for example, Emperor's Divine Might, right? If she has an overtake unique like Tama, she's not going to be hitting that because both of these fronts are both rocketing off with victory cheer. There's no one here to overtake. So these fronts down here, these ends down here are actually going to have more of a chance to win. Now, a way to combat this is to run a front of your own, right? So in a triple front lobby, one front is not going to hit victory cheer. So one front is going to start lagging behind because they didn't hit their acceleration. And now this front is going to be a good target for your end closer, who is maybe a little bit stronger than other end closers. And now your end closer will be able to no stopping me off of this front. Your end closer will be able to pass this front, if she's good enough, right? Because what triple front is doing is it is making the lobby so long that your ends are going to have trouble hitting those overtakes. Your ends are going to have trouble hitting no stopping me off of other fronts, which means the ends that are positioned further back, which in other words are going to be ends that do not have very strong mid races or ends that don't have very high stats, these ends are actually going to have more of an advantage because they can knock up against one another. They can no stopping me here. They can no stopping me here. And so I think the ends are in a very interesting dichotomy right now. And this is one of the things that I don't really like about end closer meta, where you're kind of in this position where like you're all fighting to be in the back. Like you're all fighting to not push up. You're all fighting to like see who can be the worst in the mid race so that you can try to hit these Accels in the end race. But I will stress that isn't good because you have fronts here who are actively trying to make the lobby as long as possible so that your end closers, who you are trying to keep as far back as possible, cannot catch up even if they hit no stopping me, right? Even if they hit everything perfectly, it's not going to work. So it is difficult, I think, to really visualize what is happening without running it on your own, but I have seen a lot of like players running Tama who have been frustrated because their Tama is not hitting unique. I have seen players who are running no stopping me ends getting frustrated because they're not even hitting no stopping me. It's just important to try and keep in mind that there is going to be a little bit of a weird case here because we have a front and end meta. There's not going to be a lot of paces, there's not going to be a lot of lates, and the track is so long that fronts will be able to push so far ahead that they will deny a lot of good end closers from some acceleration options that they may have otherwise had. So Radiant Star is the scenario skill in this game. You are going to get Radiant Star basically for completing Trackblazer. And Radiant Star will increase your target speed, it will increase your acceleration, and it will give you stamina recovery. And this skill is going to hit at any point after the 50% mark in the race. So it can hit before the final spurt starts, it can hit right at the final spurt, it can hit way late, like 50 meters before the end. So that makes the skill very, very, very unreliable, but also extremely strong. The TLDR is that it is very expensive. if you only use one of these effects, it's not a good value. But if it hits at a point where you're using 2 or 3 of these effects, it's an amazing value. This is literally like Christmas Oguri's unique, except there's no way to control when it actually hits. So I would say that Radiant Star is generally a buy it if you have SP, because it can literally win a match for you, right? Because there's so few accelerations, if this hits, it's literally going to accelerate you more than anybody else in the lobby is getting acceleration, and you're probably going to win. That being said, it is very expensive, and so if you are bogged down by a lot of very, very reliable skills and you want to build a very, very consistent Uma, maybe you could skip it. But I would generally recommend buying it. I do think it's very strong in this track just because you are going to be using all 3 of these effects. Depending on when it hits, you will be using any of these 3 effects. So you're always going to get some kind of value out of this skill, but it is inconsistent in when it's going to hit. So what value you're getting out of it, you don't really know. So this skill can hit from about the mid race, right? So about here, all the way to the end of the race. And we don't know when it's going to hit. It can hit any point on this line, okay? So what are we getting when this skill is hitting? If we are hitting this skill and we're starting from here, and so if we are hitting this skill anywhere from here to about here, right? I'm using this over here as a key, so refer to this to see kind of what I'm talking about. But if we're hitting the skill at any point on this brown line, we're going to be getting the heal. We're also going to be using the velocity as a mid-race velocity skill. So this is really strong if it hits right here, okay? If we are hitting this skill, and we're hitting the skill like right here. Oops, that's too far. If we're hitting the skill right here. So if we're hitting the skill like right here up until the final leg, right? We are going to be getting the heal. We're going to be using this as a heal. We're also going to be using the velocity that this gives us. And we're going to be using the acceleration when we carry over into the final spurt. So this is a very strong time to hit the skill. This is basically Christmas Oguri Cap's best case scenario when she is hitting Festive Miracle. This is literally Festive Miracle with carryover when it's hitting right here. So it's really, really strong because we're getting all 3 of these effects and we're using them all. Now, if the skill is hitting a little bit later, for example, if it's hitting right here, so if it's hitting after the final leg, the final spurt starts here, we are going to be probably still getting a good effect out of the heal. The heal is going to be a little bit late, so we're going to be recalculating our spurt if we didn't have enough HP to start with, but then we get enough HP with the Radiant Star heal. We're also going to be getting acceleration out of this. So we're going to be using the full effect of the acceleration to accelerate faster than probably everybody else in the lobby, which is really strong. Now, unfortunately, we don't get the velocity here because our top speed, we're not at our top speed. So raising the cap on that top speed is not going to help us very much when we are starting to accelerate to our new top speed here. So we're only getting 2 effects here, which is fine. And then pretty much for the rest of the race, let's go ahead and look at the rest of the race. If Radiant Star hits at any point back here, right, we're going to be mostly just getting the velocity. So this is mostly just velocity, which is why people can say that this skill is not very good. So there's a really big chance that you're just getting a 0.25 base velocity out of this skill if you hit it too late. You know, say you're Symboli Rudolph and you hit Radiant Star right before you hit your Behold the Emperor's Divine Might, you're still accelerating faster into that new velocity. So like you could still get use out of it that way. A 0.25 velocity skill in the home stretch here is not anything to sneeze at. Like, end race velocity is really strong in this track because there's so few acceleration options. So even if it is hitting here, you're still getting use out of it, right? You're just maybe not getting as much value as the SP that you put into it. However, I do think that it's worth it because if you're hitting it here, it can just win you the game. And if you're hitting it here, it can still be a very, very strong force multiplier to help you win the game. And if you're hitting it here, it can still help you win the game. Like, it's never going to just brick and do absolutely nothing, unlike a skill like Rushing Gale, which if you hit Rushing Gale like here, is going to do nothing. If you hit Rushing Gale here, it's going to do nothing, right? So Radiant Star will always be doing something. And if you can get like about 2 effects to hit on it, then it's going to be plenty worth the SP that you spend on it. And if you can get an effect that hits like right here on it, it will win you the game. So for those reasons, I do think that Radiant Star is going to be worth the pickup if you have the SP for it. I would prioritize it over some things like some basic velocity skills, but I maybe wouldn't prioritize it over like really, really important velocity skills like curvature or something like that. But the other big caveat here is that you don't want to rely on Radiant Star for your recovery. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later because I'm going to talk about stamina requirements, but just keep in mind that if you're hitting the Radiant Star way back here and you need it for your recovery, you're not going to be winning the race. How much stamina do you need to survive the race course? A lot. You want to get a lot of stamina. You want to get a lot of recoveries. You want to get a lot of everything. I don't like giving exact 100% use this stamina requirements because so much about this course especially is so variable based on lots of different factors. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit. Every stamina decision that you make depends on your own perception of your acceptable risk. I can't tell you what you should do because I might tell you something that I would take but will die on the course for you if you get unlucky, and then you're gonna say, Ray made me understam, or Ray made me overstam. Like, I don't wanna get into that situation, so I wanna just talk about what you can do and what you can kind of look at in order to change your acceptable risk level. Your basic survival is going to depend on your stamina value, of course, your raw stamina value, but it also depends on your guts. And guts is going to be something that we're building a lot more of in Trackblazer because we're just getting a lot of random stats. And some of those stats are going into guts. We're buying manuals that show up. Some of those manuals will be guts. So it really just depends. Your stamina consumption is also going to depend on your wit check on the downhills. So if you have a really high wit, you probably need a little bit less stamina. So there is no easy copy-paste answer on how much stamina you need. So I can say things like, take 1k stamina, take 1 gold, take Radiant Star, and you'll be fine. And maybe you won't be fine because your guts is like 200 or something, right? So just try to think about it holistically. Try to think, I need a lot of stamina for this, and think about where your acceptable risk is. I can survive a course on 1k plus a gold plus Radiant if I hit Radiant at the right time. Even if I hit Radiant a little bit delayed, it's not like the worst thing in the world. You know, maybe I have a lot of wit though, maybe I have a lot of guts though, like it's tricky. So instead of giving you an exact stat line, I'm going to give you hard concrete examples of Umas that I have built that I run in room matches, and I'm going to use calculators to show you what their survival rate is. And I intentionally chose Umas that I built that are a little bit more borderline so you can try to get a better gut feel of exactly where the line is. However, I'm going to advocate that if you're not sure if your Uma will survive, especially if you're buying skills at the very end, you should try to use calculators. With calculators comes a disclaimer that different stamina calculators will show you slightly different numbers. So no stamina calculator is really going to be identical. Really, ideally, you're looking for a greater than 90% spurt rate when you are calculating. This is going to be the speed that your Uma is moving at the end of the race. Calcs should always be taken with a grain of salt. I feel like sometimes calculators lead to very black and white thinking when really, again, everything about this game is about acceptable risk, and that includes your stamina. With all that being said, here are a couple of Umas that I have built that I have run on this race course that can survive or maybe cannot survive. And I want to show these as examples rather than say you need this stamina, okay? This is an Inheritable brand that I built. She has 1,032 stamina, 659 guts, 967 wit. She did not get long S. And she runs Swinging Maestro, After School Stroll, and Radiant Star. So if this Narita Brian whiffs Maestro, she does not spurt, unless Radiant Star hits before the late race. So I am banking on hitting Swinging Maestro. Now, if I was trying to play this extremely safe, where my Uma would survive almost no matter what, I would have bought a second gold recovery. I didn't. Because I think in my head, if she whiffs After School Stroll, she's fine. If she hits Maestro and Stroll and hits Radiant way too late, she's fine. If she whiffs Maestro and gets very, very lucky with Radiant Star, she's fine. So my acceptable risk I have reduced down to whiffing Maestro and hitting delay on Radiant Star. On the flip side, this is my Valentine Bourbon that I built. You can think of Valentine Bourbon Unique as a 0.15, so it's about 1 white skill. This Valentine Bourbon will die very, very often because she is relying almost solely on Radiant Star to hit before the final spurt rate. If Radiant Star hits before the final race starts, she's fine. Her spurt rate is great. She lives. She does amazing. But Radiant Star is not going to always or even often hit before that time, and so she is going to die more often than not. If she had another gold recovery, like if I had gotten cooldown on her, she would be fine. But 900 stamina, less than 600 guts, long S, and just one Swinging Maestro plus Radiant Star plus the 0.15 in her unique, which is about equivalent to a white skill, doesn't pass. And this is my Christmas Oguri. Not a good Oguri. Don't copy it. Don't use it as a template. This is the very first Uma that I built in this scenario. But I want to communicate that Christmas Oguri is a little bit annoying to count for, because you have to know the proc requirements of all of your recoveries, and you have to know that you're going to be hitting them reliably. This is a little bit different if you can hit something like Corner Recovery or After School Stroll if you're running an End Closer Oguri, something that's going to hit very reliably. Or if you're running Pace Oguri, you just run the Gourmand that she has in her kit, you run like a Corner Recovery, you pick a couple other things, and you're fine. But you really, on Christmas Oguri, have to know the proc requirements of all of your recoveries so that you know that you can hit them reliably. For example, this is my End Closer Christmas Oguri. She inherited Dazzling Diver from a Summer Special Week. Dazzling Diver only hits from 4th through 6th place, so my End Closer Oguri has to hit 6th place in the mid-race in order to activate Dazzling Diver. If she fails to do that, she just dies, because she does not have enough recoveries to go into her spurt. She won't activate Festive Miracle before the late race, which means that she loses not just Dazzling Diver, but also Festive Miracle before the late race. 777s is way too late on this course. Do not take it on Christmas Oguri, please. It is awful on this course. I took it for her career, basically, and just to see how bad it actually looks on the course, it's bad. Don't take it. Radiant Star, again, can proc her unique. It can proc Festive Miracle, and one of the reasons Christmas Oguri remains very strong on this track, even though she can't get reliable carryover, is that if Radiant Star procs really, really early and it procs her unique, you can chain Radiant Star into Festive Miracle. They're the exact same effects. You just double the effect, and you blast through the course. Doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, like, she just wins. So something about Christmas Oguri is that people are saying, you know, you can understam on her and reallocate her stats elsewhere, which is true to a point, but again, you have to make sure that you are hitting all of those recoveries before the final spurt. With all that out of the way, I just want to communicate that CM11 Pisces Cap is going to just be a Trackblazer learning check. We are moving into a massive stat check CM immediately after a new scenario. So for this CM, I really would encourage you to focus on learning Trackblazer mechanic, trying to increase the speed at which you are playing, trying to become more familiar with Trackblazer mechanics, and paging through your shops really quickly, when to use your items, how often you should be checking your races, things like that. And to communicate that this CM is probably going to have a very high ace variance, because some people will just hit Trackblazer a little bit easier than others, and some people won't really spend as much time on it as other people will. Which means that you might see anywhere from like just a regular S rank ace to like a UG ace. And even like a S rank or S plus rank can beat a UG ace depending on stamina, depending on skills, depending on what they hit. So really just try to focus on being as thoughtful and conscientious of your builds as you can while hitting those stamina checks, and I am sure that you will do fine. Thank you so much, and thank you again for watching this super long guide. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys later.